Let's face it, hindsight is 2020. It's easy to poke fun at the Western Union CEO who turned down Alexander Graham Bell's telephone patent for just $100,000, or wonder how Blockbuster could pass up the opportunity to buy Netflix for a bargain and then resist going digital. But let's be honest, who could have predicted that the telephone would become one of the greatest inventions of all time? And who would have thought that moviegoers would abandon video rental stores for the convenience of online streaming? On second thought, let's stop apologizing for our inevitable position in the present and just rip into the following 9 worst business decisions ever made. Who's up first? Not signing the Beatles. 50 years have passed since one of the greatest music blunders of all time. Back in 1962, the Beatles strutted their stuff at Decca Records' London office for an hour-long audition where they played 15 songs. However, the outcome was not what they expected. The band was infamously rejected by Dick Rowe, the talent scout for Decca Records, who declared that he didn't like their sound and believed that groups, especially 4-piece ones with guitars, were outdated. Little did he know that his decision would go down in history as one of the biggest misses of all time. And guess what? The Beatles didn't let that rejection bring them down. They then signed with EMI, a small and relatively unknown record label at the time, and the rest is history. They became the best-selling band in the world, selling over 600 million albums globally by 2014. Their music has sold well over 2 billion copies worldwide and turned EMI Records into a powerhouse in the music industry. At one point, the demand for their music was so high that they even hired the label that once rejected them, Decca Records, to distribute some of their music. Talk about the irony. Passing up buying Google for $750,000 in 1999. Can you imagine turning down the chance to buy Google for a mere $750,000? Well, that's precisely what happened back in the day when Larry Page and Sergey Brin, the co-founders of Google, approached Excite.com with an offer in 1999. Initially, the Google duo asked for $1 million, but Vinod Khosla, the inventor who was backing Excite at the time, haggled them down to the bargain price of $750,000. Seems like a steal, right? But unfortunately for Excite, their CEO, George Bell, wasn't interested in buying Google. Fast forward to the present, and Google's market value is over $1 trillion. Yes, trillion with a T. It's one of only 3 companies to ever reach that level. Meanwhile, Excite.com was sold in 2004 for $500 million, which is the amount of money that Google now makes in just one day. That's right, $500 million is now pocket change for the tech giant, which rakes in a mind-boggling $180 billion per year. Not buying the patent to the telephone. The story goes that in the late 1800s, the world was communicating via telegraphs. Then Alexander Graham Bell came along with a game-changing invention, the telephone. He offered the patent to Western Union for a mere $100,000. At that time, Western Union had a monopoly on the telegraph, the world's most advanced communications technology, making it one of America's richest and most powerful companies, with $41 million in capital and the backing of the financial world. However, William Orton, the president of Western Union, declined the offer, dismissing it as a mere toy. He couldn't understand why it was necessary when messages could already be sent clearly via the telegraph office. Little did Orton know that within just 2 years, Bell's telephone patents would be worth $25 million. Meanwhile, Western Union tried to develop its own telephone system, but ultimately failed. The company even accused Bell of stealing their ideas, resulting in a patent lawsuit that Bell ultimately won. In the end, Western Union backed away from the telephone business, while Bell's company became the backbone of the telecommunications industry in the United States. Rejecting Harry Potter. Back in 1996, when J.K. Rowling received a rejection letter for Harry Potter, the publisher executive who sent it was pretty darn confident that the book would flop. Oh boy, were they wrong. If they could only go back in time and obliviate themselves to forget this blunder. Despite facing rejection after rejection, Rowling refused to give up on her dream. She believed that her novel was a winner, even when others doubted her. She submitted her manuscript to multiple publishers, getting knocked back time and time again. It wasn't until her 13th attempt that a publisher finally said yes to Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. And the rest, they say, is history. When the Sorcerer's Stone hit shelves on July 26, 1997, it took the world by storm. Overnight, Rowling went from living in a modest apartment in Edinburgh to becoming a global superstar. It just goes to show that perseverance pays off, even when the odds seem stacked against you. Passing on Netflix. Blockbuster had a chance to secure its place in movie history and own one of the biggest names in entertainment, but one decision changed everything. When Netflix founders offered to sell the company to Blockbuster for just $50 million, Blockbuster CEO John Antioco turned them down. At the time, Blockbuster was a giant in the movie rental space, with over 9,000 stores, a $3 billion valuation, and company earnings of over $800 million per year in late fees alone. Meanwhile, Netflix was a struggling DVD mailing service with a vision for the future of entertainment, but no viable streaming technology yet. Reed Hastings and Mark Randolph, Netflix co-founders, had been trying for months to get a meeting with Blockbuster executives. When they finally did it, they proposed a joining of forces, pointing out the weaknesses in Blockbuster's approach and the potential of Netflix's vision. But Antioco wasn't interested, even appearing to find the proposal comical. Unfortunately for Blockbuster, that decision marked the beginning of the end. As competition from companies like Netflix and Redbox intensified, Blockbuster filed for bankruptcy in 2010, and its stores began to close. Meanwhile, Netflix became a movie streaming powerhouse, ultimately becoming an award-winning production company and making $25 billion in revenue in 2020. Signing away Star Wars merchandising rights for $500,000. In 1977, the executives at 20th Century Fox made a decision that would go down in entertainment history as one of the biggest blunders ever. They had so little faith in the Star Wars franchise that they signed away the merchandising rights for any and all Star Wars films to George Lucas in exchange for his $500,000 directorial fee. It's hard to believe that such a short-sighted decision could have been made, especially considering the massive success of the Star Wars franchise. The combined revenue from merchandising alone is estimated to have exceeded $3 billion, and it continues to grow every year. Elvis Presley was told to stick to truck driving, as he'd never make it as a singer. Back in May of 1954, a young and unknown Elvis Presley took to the stage at the Hi-Hat Lounge in Memphis, Tennessee, to perform with Eddie Bond's pop group. The audience was unimpressed, and even the lounge owner was underwhelmed with Presley's performance, leading to the King of Rock and Roll being rejected from the gig. To make matters worse, Eddie Bond himself had to break the news to Presley, crushing the young musician's dreams and telling him that he should just stick to truck driving. Fast forward to 1957, and Presley was on his way to becoming a cultural phenomenon with his role in the movie Jailhouse Rock. But despite his success, he couldn't forget the pain of being rejected by Bond and his group. As he boarded the train to Hollywood, he wondered aloud, "I'm curious what Eddie Bond thinks about it now." Ironically, a year later, Bond and Presley found themselves performing together as part of an ensemble with none other than Johnny Cash. While Bond never achieved the same level of fame as Presley, he did tour with some of the biggest names in music, including Roy Orbison, Jerry Lee Lewis, Carl Perkins, and Warren Smith. Yahoo turned down megabucks from Microsoft. Back in the early days of the internet, Yahoo was the king of the hill. But by the turn of the millennium, they were already starting to lose their grip on the throne. Then in 2008, Microsoft came knocking with a jaw-dropping offer of $44.6 billion to buy Yahoo and take control of their massive user base. But co-founder Jerry Yang shockingly turned them down, leaving investors fuming and scratching their heads in disbelief. The consequences were catastrophic for Yahoo. They continued to slide further and further into obscurity, hemorrhaging users and profits as they struggled to keep up with more nimble competitors. Today, their valuation has plummeted to a mere $32 billion, a far cry from the heady days of the dot-com boom. It just goes to show that even the most successful companies can come crashing down if they don't have the foresight to see what's coming next. Kodak's poor decisions. Back in 1975, the geniuses at Eastman Kodak had developed something that would revolutionize the world of photography: the digital camera. They were ahead of their time, But instead of sharing it with the world, they kept it locked up, collecting dust on a shelf. Why? Because they were too afraid it would eat into their profits from their film business, which dominated the US market with an incredible 90% share. Fast forward to the early 1980s, when a challenger arrived on the scene. Fuji, a Japanese company, offered lower-priced film and supplies, which quickly gained popularity among US consumers. However, Kodak executives were confident that American buyers would stay loyal to their beloved homegrown brand. Their arrogance proved costly. In 1984, when the Los Angeles Olympics offered Kodak the opportunity to become their official film, the company refused, and Fuji stepped in to take the coveted spot. It was a turning point that allowed Fuji to gain a significant foothold in the US market and kickstart their growth. Despite all the warning signs, Kodak refused to change its ways, and it all came crashing down. In 2012, the once great company filed for bankruptcy, unable to recover from the weight of its poor decisions. What would your answer be if someone asked you what the worst business decision ever made was? It's a great question to think about, both to give yourself some relief — huge companies make mistakes too — but also to see what you can learn from the bad decisions of lore in order to prevent them from happening in your business. Of course, it's easy to see the folly of these decisions in retrospect, and no one can make the right decisions all the time. But I suspect if each of these unfortunate executives had approached these decisions with a little more curiosity, a little more open-mindedness, and a little less certainty about the rightness of their position, we might all be using Western Union Kodak smartphones.